This is basically a lot of war stories that happened to me in the last year and a half. So first off, I had a spiritual awakening. My spiritual awakening happened strangely while I was studying physics. I just recently dived into consciousness research as a possible PhD and found that very suddenly I could no longer accept materialism as a viable position. That single change in thinking, in thought patterns, just about blew my head off. It's like a dam bursting, as if there'd been a huge amount of pressure built up. My heart opened up. I felt an intense wave of love for all creation. I wasn't afraid of pain or death or social disgrace. It was really powerful awakening. I immediately began to feel different sensations wake up in my body. Every time I'd have a thought or a feeling that was unworthy of this new state, my solar plexus would tighten up, as if in warning. I quickly discerned that this was some form of physical psychic ability that warned me if an action or thought or feeling was dangerous for me in some way. Negative thoughts about another person, annoyance at my kid, or drinking fluorinated town water, all strong sensation. It's very much like a game of hot or cold. I also began to see faint glassy auras around people and trees. I could see energy moving between different objects. If I put myself in a meditative state and looked at the sky, I could see tiny motes. If I blink rapidly, I've got a black spot in the place of my third eye. And if I concentrate on it, it turns into a giant eye staring back at me. I also began to be able to talk to my guides, primarily my guardian, who's called Sanriel. She's not really a she, but she humors me and likes to make jokes about being a lady. It took me over 12 months before I was able to have fluid conversations with her, even though I could feel her presence as a felt sensation. Finally, I developed a deep inner knowing, or gnosis, that seemed to have woken up. It allowed me to rapidly skim through information, especially esoteric information, and feel the rightness of it, or if it had some distortion in it. It's like I was re-remembering. I didn't know it then, but I'd been prepared very carefully for this awakening for the last 7 or 8 years since I left the army. I've been doing intense inner work, integrating traumas, overcoming PTSD, and minimizing my egoic structures. Despite my progress, I'd gone as far as I could to evolve my consciousness with a materialist mindset. What this process had given me, though, was a high degree of integration and internal stability, enough to safely bring my psychic gifts online. I've since learnt from my guides and other spiritual practitioners that one reason why most people don't have psychic abilities yet is it would be detrimental for them at their current integration. Most people think that their current level of trauma is actually normal and they're operating fine. But if they gain psychic abilities, there's a possibility of reflecting too much darkness and going backwards in their development. An example is the vast number of people diagnosed with schizophrenia. These are very often people with incredible psychic capabilities, but no learnt stability. Their ability to see overwhelms their ability to cope with what is seen, which creates a feedback loop into psychosis. The only reason my psychic centers came online was I was well enough to handle the outcome. I shelved my science books. I went headlong into esoteric research. I was on a spiritual high and I was eager for the next insight. I didn't have to wait very long. The Skinwalker Ranch incident. The really high strangeness began a week later while I was watching the program The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. I'd been watching it for research purposes, and despite my wife's reservations, I'd sucked her into watching it with me. We both felt the palpable malevolence of the place, even though it was only a program, which intensely interested me while thoroughly freaking my wife out. If you haven't watched it, it's a series of experiments to provoke reactions from the ranch and measure them using multiple sensors. One experiment was to bring in a Kabbalah occult guy with psychic sensitivity to perform a portal opening ritual. They recorded the ritual, they played it at a highly active area to see what would happen, and it generated a huge cold area around the place. And right then, my wife and I felt a massive wave of hatred roll from the place directed at them and us. We looked at each other for a moment, and then suddenly a huge prismatic orb appeared in my lounge room next to the TV, about the size of a person. It was there for an instant and immediately disappeared, but I could still feel its presence. I immediately sent love to it and said that it was welcome here. which is my first unbelievably stupid mistake. Suddenly the whole house went cold, like meat locker cold. It must have dropped at least 5 degrees across the whole house. Even worse, there were colder spots scattered around the house, and I got strange feelings from them, spiky and tingly, like they were sucking the heat out of me. My wife at this stage was freaking out hard. She'd had experiences as a kid and developed an almost phobic fear of the supernatural. So this experience was literally her worst nightmare. She was too scared to sleep, all the lights were on, and she was talking about selling the house. My supernatural experience was fast becoming a potential financial nightmare. I immediately started looking for a professional to clear out the infestation. I found Rob. Looking at a video of him, I immediately knew he was the real deal, mainly from the look in his eyes. People with high spiritual attainment have this look around the eyes that I can identify. He came around just in time because my wife was staring daggers at me. Rob came in, started pointing out different spirits, the location of a large portal in my living room, and other strange phenomena. He even detected a large positive spirit in the house that seemed to follow me around, stay on my left shoulder, which turned out to be Sanriel. Strangely, it was like my psychic sensitivity had gone way up, and I was feeling what he was pointing out and getting mental images of the one negative entity that wouldn't leave seemed to be the biggest problem. After the house was cleared and hundreds of Gorka spirits had gone through the portal, then the effects were dramatic. It felt like Rob had taken a spiritual gurney and just blasted the whole house clean. And the method he used was fascinating. Namely, he had a gang of higher entities that were orchestrating the event, largely using concentrated waves of love to induce cooperation with earthbound spirits that were here. It was this incident that kicked me back out of the everything is one mindset and back into the world of duality, albeit at a higher octave. This incident was the initiation into this duality, into embracing and understanding the darkness around me. And from then on, my sensitivity to the darkness increased exponentially. Eventually, I began to sense a vast web of darkness operating around me almost at every turn. It was clear to me, while vast waves of beneficial spiritual impulses rain down on our collective every moment, constantly pushing us to evolve towards divinity, sizable counterwaves rise to meet and dim this light from spiritual forces and human confederate. My gnosis told me that the evolutionary progress of mankind had been knocked wildly off course. I eventually recognized this awareness itself as a trial, set up to force me to integrate this level of darkness into my heart center, to hold love for everyone and everything, light or dark, and not fall prey to apathy, cynicism, or paranoia. I've since met several people that have failed this step the first time around, and normally they end up in a mental health facility. Many others who sidestep this developmental stage and stay stuck in spiritual bypassing. It was a trial to be able to bathe in that amount of negative polarity and still keep that love. This was about stability again. How could I keep my consciousness stable in such an environment? It's a work in progress, but I did well enough that my guides set up further trials to test me. Past life regressions. Exploring my problematic past lives was the next trial to increase my internal stability and integration. A strange situation I kept running into was I'd see something World War I related, images such as trenches, and I'd immediately feel this feeling of immense grief and sadness. The memories felt different, as if they're not coming from me, but from somewhere else. It persisted, so I went to get a past life regression. So Dolores Cannon process, and I started getting an altered state, and I was getting images of a Highland manor, but destroyed, broken bricks and burnt beams. As I went deeper, my body started to shake and spasm. I was totally conscious, but I felt something start to use my vocal cords. I realized I was channeling, but I was still conscious and in control, so I gave it some space and got ready to expel it if necessary. There's an entity called Patrick, who was a sergeant in the Scots Guard. He was brought up in some sort of occult family like the Masons or Scottish Rite. And he was a scion meant to take over the family and the circle. However, his father was a hard, controlling man, and he rejected this destiny and went off on his own. He joined the army to escape, served in the colonies, and then in World War I on the Western Front. He returned on leave from the front to visit what was left of the family manor. He'd heard rumours of the destruction, but he didn't want to believe them. His younger brother had been chosen as the next scion, but he was unsuited. He was too religious. And when the full practices were revealed, he confessed the family secrets to the local church. Not long after, the manor was set ablaze, the family scattered and fled. Patrick stood in the ruin he felt he had created and resolved to find a bullet with his name on it. He was bitter and he was full of grief, but he was psychically gifted, and he had used this to stay alive, knowing when to duck his head, when to not be in a trench section. But it also tormented him with the spiritual horrors around him. The stress and the battle shock from the bombardments and the assaults were cracking the psyches of the soldiers open. The negative entity possession was rampant. Moreover, he could feel a huge amount of loose energy from the death and the terror being siphoned off to power something. He said it was less a war and more a vast blood sacrifice on an industrial scale. He told me it was up to me now to save him and all the previous lives. There were also other lives, echoes that were also present. I'd lived similar lives to Patrick, where I was a member of a religious military order, and all my brothers had been killed in a short period. There was immense grief and pain and loss. When I heard Thunder Perfect Mind, a meditation on the Great Mother aspect from the Nagamadi Library being performed, I began to weep, and the words tore from my throat, "Mother, how could I have forgotten you?" After that, I had a sense of being part of a Gnostic order, hunted and secret. The lives had commonalities of feeling grief, loss, and especially persecution. I came to understand later that I needed to experience a similar octave of this grief and persecution in my own life to heal and integrate these lives. It also led me to a condition called the witch wound, where persecution and death from previous lives for being psychic can cause these abilities to become blocked as a defense mechanism. It takes feeling like you're in a safe environment to explore this and allow psychic capabilities to unfold. There was one other life that I sensed in myself, and this was a really strange one. I'd always had dreams of floating down rivers in a strange land, just letting the current take me and watching the countryside around me. They normally occur during the most challenging and emotionally turbulent times in my life. After my life started to open a bit to me, I recognized that these dreams are not complete fabrications, but some sort of memory fragments. They've been edited, as if swapping out objects and structures with comparable images that I was familiar with. Over time, it occurred to me that this being was undertaking a rite of passage or a pilgrimage. He was journeying from the headwaters to the sea, floating with the current, just letting the water take him. When he made it there, he experienced a deep unification with all that was, and his physical journey was a symbolic representation of an intense spiritual initiation. Eventually, I asked Sanriel and my guides who this being was, and they replied, "A master." His energy reminded me a bit of those yogis you see in a forest half naked to better integrate with their environment. His consciousness utter peace and calm. As a joke, I named him Alien Fish Yogi. I'm lucky he had a sense of humour, because when my awakening progressed to the next threshold, he contacted me telepathically. We had a brief but meaningful conversation. He joked to me that I had inherited his sweet tooth, and he sent me a picture of some plants that looked like spring onion bulbs but were sweet like sugarcane. Fish Yogi was harvesting them and eating them from the riverbanks. When he told me he was proud of me, it was an emotional moment. To get praise from such a being is humbling. Timeline incidents. Soon after my spiritual awakening, I began to notice discontinuities in my perceived reality. There's little things at first, like noticing a house on the street for the first time, or remembering I put an object somewhere, only to have it turn up somewhere else. Events that you can ascribe to a lack of conscious awareness. But one day, my wife and I were driving home. I did a double take on a roundabout we pass at least twice a day. Usually there's a low garden and grass in the middle, but today it had suddenly sprouted a tree that was at least 4 to 5 years old. I was going to wave it off, when my wife remarked, "When did they put the tree there?" It was strange enough to remember, so my wife and I checked Google Maps, and the tree had been there for ages, at least 3 to 4 years, based on the last photo taken. Went looking for an explanation, found the Mandela effect. This is a phenomenon where millions of people outside of South Africa remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison, despite him living his ordeal and becoming the president of South Africa. This seemed to describe what we had experienced. But what was interesting was my wife and I had experienced it together, like we'd been synchronized. I put it out of my mind, but a short time later, I was looking down at my red Spider-Man socks I'd put on to make my son happy. I looked up to check something. I looked back down on my socks, and they were gone. They were not on my feet at all, like they'd never been there. I felt my skin crawl and I broke into a cold sweat. And I don't do that often. I'd looked away for a moment, something had just disappeared from existence, like it had never been there. And that actually may have been the case. I searched the house, I couldn't find them. I eventually found them hours later in a bathtub, a place I don't habitually leave anything. It was clear to me that this was some sort of timeline jumping phenomenon I was being shown, where each timeline was a different set of choices taken. It wasn't long before this hypothesis was confirmed. I woke up a month or two later to the sound of chainsaws next door. And my wife remarked, they must be cutting down that tree next door. What tree? I went out to check. There next door was a huge 40 to 50-year-old gum tree that had not been there the day before. They had chopped most of the limbs off, and the tree was screaming in pain. My mind was translating it as there's parts of me missing over and over again. I'd mowed that front lawn every second weekend for 4 years. There was no tree. There was a silver stump sticking out of the ground about 20 centimetres, but no tree. I asked my wife, and she said she was glad it was going because the birds always woke her up in the morning. What birds? I didn't remember. I made her breakfast, and I joked she'd scored a new husband. She looked at the meal and remarked it was probably an upgrade. Based on my experiences, it was evident that I was continually jumping timelines, and the jumps were edited into sleep periods or eye blinks and other times of inattention to stop the perceived discontinuities. I hypothesized, and my guides agreed, that these discontinuities are more prevalent when someone is undergoing a rapid spiritual awakening and their consciousness and therefore timeline is changing rapidly. My guides explained to me that seemingly small but key decisions in my life can have huge ramifications. They'll often show me abstract diagrams where I shift into higher timelines or lower timelines, depending if I make the right decision or pass a particular trial. They've explained that it's their job to continually herd me to the highest timeline possible. As higher beings with a lot more computational capacity than I do, I almost always roll with their recommendations. My first demonic experience. I recontacted a friend who I'd known for a few years and began to have strange experiences when I chatted with him. I was getting some felt sensations as if I was under psychic attack, really strong psychic attack, and seemed to be emanating from the person. This person, like a lot of people I know, had recently undergone a religious conversion from atheist to full-blown fundamentalist. At first, I chalked up the psychic attacks to them being powerfully psychic but constrained by the religious mindset somehow. I thought that they were expressing some form of judgmental righteousness and their will was strong enough to actually generate a degree of psychic violence. I'd actually felt it pressing on my will, trying to force me to submit. After repeated conversations, I began to discern that this was not the person's will at all. But something emerged with their energy field and was attacking me through the relational link. I perceive the relationship we have with people as black cords that come from my solar plexus and extend to that person. This presence was attacking me through this link, as well as trying to do something to my third eye. I began to examine the person's behavior and mannerisms and eventually concluded they were being negatively influenced. The fundamentalist religious framework was actually perfect for this influence because it allowed the entity to promote savage intolerance and judgment and call it love. It was emotional abuse under the guise of saving souls. This person's mind had become a maze of interlocking beliefs that they couldn't escape from. Soon their life began to implode, and when I tried to assist, the entity targeted my family and I in quick succession. My wife ended up taking a trip to hospital, and I was targeted with a massive psychic assault. I was having a conversation when I suddenly felt intensely angry and righteous. It had found a way into my throat chakra, which resulted in an immediate sore throat and intense flu symptoms out of nowhere. That night I had fever dreams where I was continually shown a higher dimensional object. There was two snakes woven together in a slithering hole, one white, one black. A voice would continuously say, "Choose." Stupidly, I complied and touched the white snake, and the shape shattered. I couldn't get out of bed the next morning. I felt drained and numb. I didn't know it at the time, but the attack had closed off my heart chakra and my third eye. The entity had also worked over my wife. filling her dreams with thoughts of me being cold to her and cheating on her. And this was semi-confirmed for her because my heart was closed and I was acting a bit more ego-driven than I'd normally be. I spent the next 2 days in bed. I just got my ass kicked. And it was pretty humbling. I thought I'd have a high enough vibration to shrug off most psychic attacks, but this thing had cut through my defenses and run riot. I realized that physical proximity to the entity vastly increased its effectiveness in penetrating my etheric body. At this point, I didn't have a clear idea what the thing was, only that it was dangerous and it was highly aggressive. Luckily or unluckily, I'd find out soon, because I'd booked to do a meditation course at the Clear Vision School over the weekend. During the meditations, the blocks on my chakras dissolved and I rebuilt my equilibrium. Most people there were clairvoyant and they were lovely. It was a real healing experience for me. That night, I thought of the person and I connected with the entity directly, seeing an image of it for the first time. It was a cross between, looked like a cross between the Queen from the movie Aliens and a black dragon. It had showed itself to me deliberately. And I was intimidated. It was dark, it was ancient, it was capable. It seemed that this person had undergone a spiritual awakening, but of a dark variety, where instead of oneness and love, their initiation was into fear and supplication. In the depths of their despair, a higher entity had cracked them open and forced them to submit to its influence through terror and the threat of death. It was so traumatic that it opened a hole in their auric field and a demon entered as a life force extraction device for this higher entity. Nasty stuff. For the safety of my family, I decided to pull back and reassess. I eventually told the person, but since they believed that psychics were evil or delusional, it didn't go over well. Without consent, I couldn't engage someone like Rob to clear it, so I was stuck. I kept trying to give up and do the "this is their path to walk" argument, but my intuition rebelled. I couldn't give up the notion completely. I was to find out later from my guides that there was a karmic obligation that I needed to fulfill, a contract. I learned several things from the experience. The first is to ask the guides for help. I've been too proud and independent, and I tackled something outside my weight class. I hadn't trusted my guides enough to rely on them. You guides are experts on the spiritual world, and the purpose of guardians like Sanriel is to maintain the integrity of your consciousness. Ask for protection. The thing keeps attacking. Ask for them to drive it away. Moreover, ask for advice. Secondly, powerful negative entities can use the possessed person as an entry mechanism into the auric field through the relational links in the solar plexus and through physical proximity. It was only much later that I found out the subtle influence that could be transmitted down the link, and I had fallen prey to it. For example, I was feeling a lot of judgment and anger towards the person for getting themselves into this mess, even though they were the victim. Later, when I removed the influence, this went away. Possession of this type turns the victim in a transmission tower for negative energy to every person they interact with. Thirdly, these things are physically dangerous. They can and will go after you in the physical environment, especially through people or animals nearby if you can sense them. Big ones are higher entities that have the ability to perceive the timelines and the consequences of changes. You might suddenly have a whole lot of accidents happen to you. However, it only directly attacked me when I directly intervened. So I knew it had guardrails on its actions. It feared some consequences, otherwise it would have just been more direct at driving me off. I needed another approach, and this would come in the form of a video that hit my YouTube feed about 6 months later. My first exorcism. This video was made by a British psi researcher, Dr. Terence Palmer, now deceased. He was primarily a clinical psychologist that studied the removal of negative entities from patients referred to him. While he was not psychic himself, he employed a number of mediums that had the capability to undertake the work. This was accomplished the same way Rob works, through the intervention of a group of beneficial entities, often coordinated by the medium's spirit guides. Watching some clearances, I got a feel for the remote procedure they were settling on. First, check the integrity of the person's guides and higher self. Next is check the sovereignty of the person. The guides will check this and determine if the person's actually in control of themselves or not. Third is to ask permission from the guides and the higher self to perform the clearance. This is a crucial step. Most higher selves will say yes immediately if possessed. If the person is not possessed and going through something karmic and have the ability to self-integrate, the higher self will emphatically say no. Next, Check for entities and foreign structures in the auric field. Palmer generally classed entities small, medium, or large, or class 1 through to 3. Medium and large entities start to place energetic structures in the body to better facilitate control. Palmer often found what was perceived as devices wired into the senses that often led to a control structure located in the head. It's evident that clear perceptions at that point are not possible, which makes self-escape extremely unlikely. Next, ask the guides to clear the entities if found. They generally do this very quickly, as there's a massive number of them, and it needs to be done first before repairing the person's energy field. Next, check grounding. Almost always, the negative entities will cut the person's connection to the planetary field, which disrupts any beneficial impulses from that direction. It's usually perceived as something placed under the person's feet, like a concrete block. It better facilitates falling prey to delusion, as a person feels slightly remote from their own body, cut off. Next, check the presence of earthbound spirits and ask the guides to lead them away to the other side. Most are harmless, but some people with severe trauma may have several tormenting entities around them. The guides ask for appropriate family members to escort them. Next, check for interdimensional parasites and close any open portals near the person. This was new to me, but they are there. They're sort of like ticks. Then they present as clouds of little bugs in the person's energy field. They seem to affect possessed, but more sick people, I think due to their porous auric structure. Next, check the chakras balance, open and balance. Most negative entity possession closes most of the chakras while leaving the third eye open. The goal is to maximize direct contact with the entity and have the person become lost in their own fantasy constructs, creating a maze that they can't escape from. This works in tandem with the loss of grounding. The last two are psychological measures that Palmer liked using. The first was check for self-constructed thought forms and fold these back into the auric field. These are entities in their own right that are created and maintained by the person themselves. This can range from vengeful God images to tormenting thought forms about themselves and other people. After folding them back in, new beneficial suggestions can be provided by the person's higher self, and these can be inserted into the subconscious. Something like, I am worthy or I am loved. And finally, check for personality fragments and reintegrate. These are deeply buried traumatic events that have broken off a portion of the person's psyche. Reintegration allows a person to consciously access these so they can heal. This can happen slowly over time and works as a preventative measure for repossession. Palmer's working hypothesis was that this was by far the biggest factor in making people predisposed to possession. A truly shocking innovation to me was that Dr. Palmer and his mediums were performing this clearance without the conscious permission of the person, which I always thought was a violation of sovereignty, an ironclad cosmic law. Then my guides explained that since the possessed person cannot actually give consent due to the distortion of incoming stimuli, it was acceptable to bypass that fragment and deal directly with the higher self. I asked Sanriel point blank, do I have the capability to do this? She replied I did, and she had access to a huge pool of volunteers in the higher worlds ready to do the job. Right then, the demon attacked, full force, and it didn't let up. This time I was ready. I'd done a lot of shadow work, and I was more stable internally. She was clawing at my solar plexus and my third eye, trying to get in, but largely she bounced. I asked my guides to raise some defenses, enough to stop her, but thin enough so I could feel her attacks. Normally, she'd stop after a minute or two, but she kept attacking for a day and a half, non-stop, total fury. I could tell that she was scared, and just knowing that I could remove her meant that she had to drive me off immediately. Since this was self-defense, I didn't need much convincing. I'd got jack of the attacks, and I ran through the process. The person's guides and higher self gave permission, and I checked out their energy field. The demon was a large one, what Palmer would say is a class 3, the largest and trickiest to remove, and she'd done a number on the person's energy field. On his head was a silver helmet visor like a huge virtual reality rig that was distorting all of his sense perceptions. A huge black swirling mass was moving around their chest, and every chakra was closed except their third eye and their throat center. Worse, clustered around their chest was a mass of black eggs waiting to hatch. Concrete block had been inserted under their feet to compromise their grounding. They had incredibly dark, self-created thought forms, siphoning off their energy field. was only this person's rock-solid constitution that was offsetting the siphoning process. Once those eggs hatched, though, they'd most likely fall prey to something like chronic fatigue syndrome. The guides did their thing, and naturally the host fought the process, believing they were being demonically attacked. The process took about 10 minutes. I actually did it while I was taking a shower. And afterwards I got an image of the person kneeling in prayer, a religious symbol radiating above their head. I knew the clearance was done. Now we're in complete control again. Cosmic legalities and other exorcisms. I had a big talk with my guides about the cosmic legalities and karmic consequences of this. They were celebrating in my head, dancing around and stuff, like I'd done something profound. They'd done it all. They explained that I'd passed a developmental threshold, and this was good, timeline-wise. This was when they really started to pull back the veil and level with me. And buckle up, because this is big picture. They specifically wanted me to put this in the presentation. Sanriel advised me that the Earth had been caught in a collective timeline skip. This is where the influence of negative entities is so pervasive on the collective that it is continually led down pathways of destruction and enslavement before being reset to a previous branch point. This is collectively traumatizing the population at a subconscious level, creating further resistance to the huge energy infusions that are trying to raise the consciousness. In this way, the negative entities sought to maintain their hold on the collective until an external force broke this loop. The intervention used to stop this was the introduction of millions of high-level wandering souls, or star seeds, they're called in the New Age, like fish yogi, into the mix to try and offset this negative influence. This intervention has worked, but not optimally, as even highly developed souls can crash and burn here. Coming down here is risky, and it's challenging. When Fish Yogi decided to come here, my guides thought he had lost it. Still, this infusion into the collective has helped, and part of the collective is ascending. The guides say the current best case assessment is 60% of people go on timelines that have an upper trajectory, and 40% onto draconian timelines that cannibalize and eat themselves. The worst case is the skip continues, and this leads to the possibility of a wipe, and these skips won't be allowed to continue by management. We'd have to continue our development somewhere else. Problem is the best case is being revised downwards at regular intervals, or rather it's trending in the wrong direction. The guides actually made me rewrite this section of the presentation to impress upon you the gravity of the situation, mainly to get people motivated. There's been a lot of passivity purposely infused in the consciousness community, which include you guys. Whether the collective goes one way or another depends on people that actually have free will, and if they take action or wait for somebody else to rescue them. The guides say we need to commit to living our lives in a free and aligned manner, grow stronger from whatever the consequences of that entails, and be an example for everyone to follow. They also argue that despite ascension, the starseed interventions have culminated due to social engineering efforts. Their assessment is instead of running their own race and listening to their own gnosis, many in the conscious community are listening to each other and going around in circles. The solution is to connect with your guides and inner knowing and ride that as far as you can. As Rob will attest to, some of these things you just can't learn out of a book. Bottom line, the negative influence on the collective is still massive, and these negative entities, while losing control, are going to go down swinging. Sanriel advised that since their current plans are shot full of holes, they'll create as much chaos and trauma as possible, try and scramble faster in the transition period, and pivot to a new approach. Probably one that looks like a spiritually aligned approach, but with some built-in incremental slavery over time. They warn that we should be constantly wary of giving away our power and authority to any source. The ultimate source of authority is the core of our being and nowhere else. They argued, in essence, for increased intervention and for a lot more people or human confederates to go and help them out. This argument made a lot of sense to me, and it should, because at higher levels of reality, Sanriel and the guides and I are all one at a certain level of reality. So in a sense, they are me. Knowing a recruiting pitch, when I heard one, I asked what the consequences of clearing every negative entity that I saw, maybe shooting for a few thousand or so. They said maybe some light karmic hits and my life may be shortened, due to using my energy field for the process. Seemed a fair price to pay to help a bunch of people, so I said, I'm in. The next day I was walking down the street. I saw an old woman muttering to herself. She looked like she was in the terminal stages of drug addiction. I perceived 3 small negative entities on her energy field. I engaged her higher self, and it told me, I don't know if you should be doing this, but it accepted the help, and I did the clearance. I had the thought the next day that I wonder how long it would take to clear the suburb. I was immediately attacked by an entity. I backtraced it to a house that I walked past regularly that had given me bad vibes. The lady inside was possessed, and I cleared her while I was doing the dishes. I asked Sandra afterwards if there was any karmic effects, and she advised that we got a slap on the wrist. Some entity got annoyed, not from what we did per se, but from the sheer randomness of a split-second decision to clear a person. The next day I was in the shower wondering if I should even put this in the presentation, and if negative entities were just going to declare open war against me, when a really big loud voice in my mind said, speak the truth, you will be protected. Sandra, my guides, stopped dead when it spoke. Sandra said she hated when it did that, and there had been a change in policy, and we now had top cover. She sent me an impression of a small musical improvisation being integrated into a symphony. Crown chakra activation. So while I was gearing up for a career as an exorcist, I accidentally hit another threshold. Going through these trials had increased my sensitivity again so that I could feel more stuff in my subconscious to integrate. I detect something in my solar plexus and I ask a question, why am I feeling this? Often the fragment would come forth of myself, angry about this or disappointed about that. I'd listen to everything that it had to say, then open my heart and merge it with it. It wasn't a learned technique, it was just something I kind of made up automatically. I was having a shower and I wondered if I could do the same with my ego. I previously interacted with the ego construct, and it was sort of like a sulky teenager. It knew that it could not be in charge because we both suffer, but it still wanted things it wanted, and it wanted to survive. I started to talk to it, listening to it with an open heart. I explained to it that if it merged with me, then it would get everything it wanted, and there'd be no death for it, and we would be one. I just bathed it with love, and I told it that I loved it and I was proud of it. Eventually, it merged into my heart center, immediately changed into the image of an angel. It began to thank me over and over and over again. I began to feel really good, spacey, but good. My guides went crazy in celebration. The jokey guide said, dude, what is it with you and doing these things in the shower? And another one said, he has no idea what he just did. And I was kind of dazed, and I said back something like, it had to be this way. There was nothing else that could have been done. For some reason, this stopped them dead. I thought I'd said something wrong, but then I realized it was from respect. Sandra congratulated me, told me I'd done something special. For the first time, I could feel a white tether of light from my crown chakra to higher. I felt like I'd just taken a whole bunch of ecstasy. When I felt into the tether, waves of bliss would hit my body. And I asked Sandra what the consequences of this were. She showed me a picture of my personal timelines, and the marker moved from 3/4 mark to near the top. She said I'd done something really good, and then they never should have doubted me. Sandra said it would take, they sent me a picture of one guide shelling out money to another guide, looking sheepish. Sandra said it would take months to properly integrate this, and they would have to rejig my optimal path. Given that new capabilities might be coming online, I might better serve doing something else. They often send me pictures of opening up my head and working inside with hand tools, so it looks like they're remodeling a bit. Conclusion. In conclusion, the way I know to unlock your psychic abilities is through conscious integration of the internal and external shadow elements. Every person here, everyone, has psychic abilities waiting to be unlocked, but it takes doing the internal work to uncover them. My own work never stops. I find and integrate something new every day. It'll never end. Just a few days ago, I integrated all those past lives I talked about in this presentation. Every person here can earn their psychic abilities by taking conscious control of their spiritual evolution and getting serious about their healing. Every person here has the potential to be a portal for beneficial spiritual impulses and for beneficial spirits themselves. If you want methods to connect with your guides, see Susan Geisman's Bless Me method. My guides recommend it. because Susan has the right energy signature to teach this aspect effectively, and it's a solid technique. If you're interested in more of the big picture, my guides and I both recommend the mystic Sarah Acoldi, her YouTube channel, The Alchemist. She has extremely advanced discernment. My guides give her the ultimate compliment. She's one of ours. Just started the older videos and just work your way through. In regards to negative entity removal, I am open to referrals from psychologists for suspected candidates and even for your absolute worst treatment resistant clients as well. If not possessed, I can reintegrate fragmented personality structures, remove any earthbound spirits, rebalance their chakras, remove their self-constructed thought forms, and insert any beneficial hypnotic suggestions into the subconscious that their higher self approves of. I don't require the person's name, just an ID number that relates to that person's name, so no client confidentiality is breached. I can give a brief report back to the psychologist on what I've seen clairvoyantly. It's all done remotely and rapidly. I have studied counselling as well. I would be willing to participate in a study to test for measurable changes in client outcome variables pre and post clearance, and I'm also happy to take direct referrals from the public. If I can knock through 2 or 3 a day, then I could achieve some serious good over time. Okay, I'll end it there. If I haven't scared the crap out of you guys. Thanks for listening.
Just want to say thank you. That's amazing stuff. Amazing work. I actually wanted to ask you, because you mentioned it happened very quickly. Over what time frame are we talking about?
Year and a half, from science guy to like full-blown hippie weirdo. So like it's a year and a half. So the thing is, the time frame, the energies at the moment are really conducive to this. You know, if you guys can, it's really conducive to this. People, spiritual awakenings have contracted. The time frame has contracted. 10 years ago, it might have taken you 4 or 5 years. Like today, you can go 1 or 2 years, and just from woe to go. But it really depends on how hard you go into healing. You know, I had just PTSD, horrible stuff there, horrible traumatic things that just needed to be integrated. And then after you get to a certain level, yeah, it's on rail.
Just wondering how you integrate the timelines. You were mentioning the shifting in timelines that you're experiencing and how you integrate that into your everyday life with that, yeah, in terms of, I guess, mental and psychic integration.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. And that's why it's not really for the faint of heart. Like that's why I emphasize stability. You know, the great mystic Rudolf Steiner said that you know, clairvoyance was like a controlled psychosis, an exquisitely controlled psychosis. You know, because you are existing in the physical, and you can't just let your consciousness just go fly away and live in some other realms. You've got to be tethered to the body and experience other things as an overlay. So it's like task switching. Yeah. I mean, the timeline thing, I expect that to actually settle down, because I've talked to people like Rob who, you know, reached a really high level really early. And yet he doesn't experience much of that at all, because he's on a path. You know, it's like an elevator. If you're going up and down in the elevator, you're just switching paths. They have to change everything. You know, things have to change. There's an unlimited number of timelines. So that's one of the things, is don't get stuck. Oh, the world is as it is. No. You know, if you point your mind and your consciousness towards a particular direction, you will go there. You know, it's just depending on the universe and your guides will try and rejig everything so that you're worthy enough to make it to that path, sort of thing.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to ask what your thoughts are on NPCs. Like, from your experience, do you think that there are people here who are basically soulless and like AI programs?
I've heard that. I think that they can present as such, but they're not really, because like as far as my like esoteric reading and my own gnosis tells me, this place that we live in, people can literally, you can have somebody living their absolute heaven on earth and someone living their hell on earth, living next door to each other. You know, So people with really high spiritual attainment and people with really, where they're just starting off, they've literally, they might have only had a few lifetimes here on earth and they're starting out and they're just in a sleep state. They're just asleep. They're asleep. They're not conscious yet. It takes many lifetimes. So from my own, I got lucky. A core of what I am is got donated from someone higher. So and even then, my guides told me I've had 12 past lives here and that's like, they consider that bare minimum. They're like, you are undercooked, man. So I've heard of some people that have about 7 and they are really undercooked. So yeah, there's a lot of people in the spiritual community, really high level attainment, but yeah, they just go straight for drug addiction because they're missing that kind of bliss high they get from existing at high levels. So yeah, NPCs, I think that they're brand new people that have, just started in the physical realm. This is actually physical existence is actually for souls that want to advance. You got to go lower to go higher. So yeah, it's expanding. So yeah, running the gauntlet down here, yeah, it just takes them enough, I don't know, 100 lifetimes maybe. Who knows? Some people have been here thousands and thousands of lifetimes. They get really comfortable. And yeah, if you're not comfortable in your own skin, it's probably because you haven't had a whole bunch of lifetimes. Yeah, because yeah, I've felt like an alien the whole time I've been here. And that's so. Yeah, it's just one of those things.
I was just wondering, you speak about going through these different lifetimes and then some people starting out new. How do you perceive that someone would go on once they've reached this higher level of attainment? Would they keep living this lifetime, or is there an end goal, a place they would end up? It be that mentally or physically in some sense.
Yeah, no, it's escape velocity. So once you reach high enough, as far as I know, look, I'm no expert on this because I'm a newbie, but as far as I know, the higher you can connect through the energy centers in your crown chakra up to higher. So yeah, my guys that have me undertaking exercises where I'm continually trying to reach higher. I got a tether there, but I have not pushed up higher to get there. I can't reach them. And they said that it's because I haven't properly prepared myself. There's people, yogis and shit that go and, you're constantly doing preparations for this. If you prepare your body and your mind, it's easier. But I haven't done any of that stuff. So I'm like a rock, I'm doing Qigong and trying to do all sorts of stuff. So yeah, as far as I know, when you do connect, a vast amount of energy comes back down the link. A person who's not connected and a person who is connected, there's about 30,000 times more energy coming down that link. So if you got clairvoyance, that people, they just shine. They look like there's light pouring out of them. So yeah, once you reach that point, you are, you're embodying so much of your higher self that there's no difference between your higher self and your ego. It's one. And so at that point, you are not staying here. You're going, which is sad too, because if you've got family and stuff like that, yeah, you're off. You're not coming back. It's one of those things. That's as far as I know. But I'm not a spiritual expert in doing that stuff yet. But yeah, hopefully one day.